Ni nai 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 hiri da 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 hai da 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 hai da 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 He rai rai ni nai nai ni nai nai he nai nai ni nai nai di di rai di di rai he nai nai di di rai di di ram. Shalom, shalom, friends. Thank you for being here. It's great to see you. I'm on a high because I was just with a bunch of fourth graders putting together homeless care kits. They did so much, so fast, and so joyfully, and had such good thoughts and questions about how we can help protect unsheltered people. And that's what I love about VBM is we combine our learning with action and training the next generation to feel responsible for the world, to feel responsible, as we said last class, not that they have to complete all the work, but they got to do their part and they don't have to wait. They don't have to wait to start. They can start right now. So here in our leadership session, session 5 of 10, our topic is self-compassion and self-critique. Let's start with a poll question on self-compassion and self-critique. Number 1, I struggle more in showing myself compassion. Number 2, I struggle more in challenging myself enough. Number 3, I think I found the right balance in being gentle with myself and in being self-critical. Okay, friends, option 1, I struggle more in showing myself compassion. Option 2, I struggle more in challenging myself enough. And option 3, I think I found the right balance in being gentle with myself and in being self-critical. How would you vote today? Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 bum, 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 bum. That ought to be my nigun next week. If I did that with my kids, they wouldn't even recognize that. It's very generational. Who was it from anyways? Was that Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy? Is that Jeopardy?
Jeopardy.
Okay. Okay. 40% struggle more in showing self-compassion. 10% struggle more in challenging themselves enough. 50% think they found the right balance between being gentle enough with themselves and being challenging of oneself. Okay, friends. So as a reminder, this conversation about leadership is not pointing fingers out there at quote unquote leaders on the TV. This is about each of us and how we exercise leadership in our own ways out in the world, in quiet ways, in loud ways, in subtle ways, and not subtle ways, all the ways we make an impact. We all engage in leadership in different ways. Consistently, we see that in order to lead, we need to hold empathy for other people's situations. As motivational speaker Simon Sinek says, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. There are many ways to cultivate compassion for others. What I want to focus on here is how practicing compassion for ourselves is one of the most important ways we develop our outward compassion. Truly, by showing ourselves compassion, we are better equipped to bring compassion into our leadership. To be clear, self-compassion has its own value. It is not merely an instrument to improve our leadership. It's valuable in itself. Self-compassion means because each of us matters. It is and ends in itself. However, it's also true that self-compassion is necessary for leadership because how we treat ourselves paves the way for how we'll treat others. Meaning, if we're extremely harsh on ourselves and judge ourselves unfairly, we will, in good likelihood, come to treat the people in our charge with the same harshness and unfairness. Caring for our own needs and vulnerabilities can potentially sensitize us towards others. As a result, we will treat their needs and vulnerabilities with the same care. Compassion in general is a Torah value. In the Talmud, we learn just as God is compassionate and merciful, so too should you be compassionate and merciful. God sees in us the fullness, embraces us in our imperfections. Each of us should emulate such a path by seeing ourselves and others not with an exception of perfection, but with compassion. God's compassion is a consistent feature of the Torah, beautifully expounded upon in the Midot Harachamim, the 13 attributes of mercy found in Exodus. These include being merciful, gracious, slow to anger, plenteous in kindness, and forgiving. The word rachamim itself, sometimes translated as mercy, sometimes as compassion, derived from the Hebrew for womb, the womb, rechem, and calls to mind a parent's boundless love. It's a motherly love. It is the love felt in the womb that unconsciously we all, to some degree, look to return to. That all compassionate womb that holds us, that feeds us, that nourishes us without any expectation in return. Sometimes we even give a little kick in the womb. Some of you may have experienced that. That's one of the amazing life experiences I'll never get to experience, that kick in the womb. Indeed, compassion stems from love, and we are commanded to love. This is perhaps the best known verse in the Torah. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellows as yourself. Sometimes translated as love your neighbor as yourself. It's worth noting that there's a two-way mitzvah in the kamocha, as yourself. We are being instructed to love others as we love ourselves, and to love ourselves as we love others. The wording of the mitzvah conveys that the more we show love and compassion to ourselves, the more we strengthen our ability to show love and compassion to others. It's not for nothing that regarding v'ahavta, Rabbi Akiva taught Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is the fundamental principle of the Torah, the great Rabbi Akiva taught. This is the essence of what it's all about. Judaism is about love. The essence of it, right? The anti-Semites for a long time said, oh, Christianity came and replaced law with love. Judaism is a religion of law, and that is just false. Love is everywhere in the Jewish tradition, everywhere. And someone has distorted it by saying love is some foreign concept that's some kind of wishy-washy idea of the New Age or of some other religion. Rabbi Jill Zimmerman has noted that many of us find it far easier to be loving and kind to others than to ourselves. While we give others the benefit of the doubt, we live with a self-critical commentary running in the background of our thoughts, day in and day out. She writes in Loving Kindness Practice for Self and Others. To be commanded to love others as ourselves means that we owe ourselves the same compassion we offer others. In fact, the very notion of Shabbat can be seen as the imperative towards taking care of ourselves. Whatever Shabbat looks like for us, what is Shabbat but a day of rest in one form or another? To cease from labor, to restore ourselves. It is a day to show ourselves compassion. And I should add, to show compassion to all those in our charge, to demand no work of our children, employees, even our animals. We can also see the presence of compassion in the concept of dan l'chaf zchut, a Hebrew phrase referring to giving others the benefit of the doubt, something that can be very hard for many of us. We find in Pirkei Avot, judge, dan, all people with the scale weighted in their favor, l'chaf zchut. We must assume that when our sages referred to all people, they meant us to include ourselves. When we move through the world with compassion held for ourselves and others, when we lead with compassion, we are practicing living Torah. On the flip side of self-compassion is self-critique. In Hebrew, we refer to this as cheshbon hanefesh, self-accounting. This notion that we should hold ourselves accountable can be found also all over Tanakh, just like self-love and love of others. For example, consider how throughout Tehillim, the Psalms, King David owns up to his own transgressions, which are significant. King David is often idealized as a ruler despite his many failings, most notably his affair with Bathsheba and his orchestration of her husband's death to cover up the affair. A good number of the Psalms attributed to David Melech, King David, are acknowledgments of this heinous act and his own sincere repentance. I recognize my transgressions, he sings in Psalm 51. You, God, are just in your sentence, like punish me. In this way, King David models teshuvah for us, going through the process of reflection, restoration, and reparation. Restoration, reflection, reparation. Only by engaging in a thoroughly honest and self-critical cheshbon hanefesh is anyone able to return, which is to say, return to herself, himself, or themselves. It is not King David's perfection that makes him a celebrated leader, one of the perhaps the most celebrated leader in the Jewish tradition, who the Messiah will come from, but his ability to be self-critical enough to undertake a true cheshbon hanefesh. You know, I don't treat this argument someone made as perfect argument or even necessarily a great argument. I find it an interesting argument. Someone said, why did they believe that the Torah has a divine origin? They said, well, what ancient people would write a book about themselves that made themselves look so bad, right? The Torah over and over is making Jews look horrible, right? It tells of all of our mistakes, all of our imperfections, all of our great sins, our golden calves, all of the things that we did wrong, even, things that some might call a genocide, acts of wiping out tribes and the like, right? Things that if you wanted to make yourself look like the best people among all the peoples, you wouldn't write like 3/4 of this book, And so this person said, part of my faith in this book is how critical it is of ourselves, right? As opposed to just saying how great we are. One might even argue that God engages in a kind of cheshbon hanefesh in the Tanakh's understanding after, as we talked about last session, the devastating flood in Genesis. With Noah and his sons among the few survivors, God reevaluates the decision that led to the flood, the decision to destroy almost all life. Never again will I doom the earth because of humankind, God vows in the story. Nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. It is in some way a startling moment to see God in this story model this familiar form of leadership, of a regret, of a self-critique, perhaps. While it might seem counterintuitive, self-criticism is part of how we cultivate compassion for others as well. When we occupy a leadership position, it can be all too easy for us to judge others around us as inadequate. However, it's important to see that often the vices that frustrate us in others are the very same vices we harbor in ourselves. Simply put, what agitates us in others often agitates us in ourselves. When we are honest in our self-criticism, we can see our own shortcomings more clearly. The effects of this clarity are twofold. First, it leads us to grow and work through our own shortcomings. But second, it allows us to be gentler with others, potentially, who share our own shortcomings, or even more extreme iterations of our own shortcomings. I'm often so frustrated by people who don't listen to me, and yet I know that sometimes I'm such a poor listener. And if I was aware of that in myself, how much more gentle could I be with others when I don't feel they're listening to me? I rage against bias in the world, but I know I hold of my own biases, as we all do, right? How can I be more gentle with others who hold biases, knowing I hold my own? For example, it's very easy to feel judgment when people aren't giving more of their resources to a cause or volunteering more of their time. I hear this all the time. Why aren't more people stepping up? Why is our country so selfish, right? Yet all of us struggle to some extent with personal time management and resource allocation. What's more, someone in a leadership position might be privileged to have those kinds of commitments built into their work, as opposed to someone not in a leadership position who must make those commitments in addition to their usual ones. In this case, a leader experiencing frustration might consider the ways in which their own commitments lag. When leaders recognize that they themselves have shortcomings, it engenders more patience and kindness. The relationship between self-critique and self-compassion is not always easy to navigate. It requires that we avoid being reactionary in either, meaning we do not want to be in a position where we are having strong reactions to others, and in that way, other people are dictating whether we are in a mode of self-critique or self-compassion. Rather, we should move from the reactionary to the intentional. There's a slightly cyclical nature to this inner work. Reflect, find areas of growth, create a plan for that growth. And growth requires gentleness. We need to be gentle with ourselves, even as we are engaging in self-criticism. Otherwise, we'll never actualize our plans, instead remaining stuck in berating ourselves, unable to take action. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov taught on the value of such gentleness. A person has to judge himself favorably and find in himself some remaining good point in order to give himself the strength to avoid falling completely, God forbid. It's clear that if we are too harsh on ourselves, we may lose the motivation that change requires. By the way, that Rabbi Nachman is very much a part of Chassidut in general, that transformation is about finding our inner goodness, right? Being so committed to of seeing that goodness and building off of it. It's clear that if we are too harsh on others, we may lose the motivation that change requires. Self-criticism may lead us to understand what changes we need to make in ourselves, but self-compassion will give us the emotional fortitude to actually make those changes. If we slip up, we must dismiss all the growth we've made. I am reminded of Esther Perel's definition of self-love as our ability to see ourselves as a flawed individual and still hold ourselves in high regard. Here, the concept of Rachmana Libabai might be helpful. The translation of this phrase, Rachmana Libabai, the merciful one desires the heart. In his commentary on Exodus, Ibn Ezra notes, our ancients said God desires the heart. This, Ibn Ezra writes, is the basis of all the mitzvot. The idea that what is wanted is the fullness of our hearts occurs frequently in mystical and Hasidic Judaism. And it was often repeated by the Baal Shem Tov. We can take Rachmana Libabai as an invitation from the heavens into feeling whatever we may be feeling, moment to moment, self-criticism, self-compassion, and everything in between. There's no wrong way to feel, necessarily. It's vital to remember that self-critique and self-compassion are not just mindsets, but they are behaviors built into our lives. And as we have seen, they support each other, or can support each other. The more held and supported we feel, the more spaciousness we can have, resulting in more room for moral growth. Similarly, the more we witness moral growth, the more we may feel inspired to care for ourselves and see part of our value is innate, and part of our value is in our moral growth. These behaviors reinforce one another. There's also a process that we should enable for others educationally. As leaders, it is our role to offer others compassion rather than judging harshly. Ultimately, we want to create environments where people are making judgments for themselves rather than being constantly judged by others. Rather than judging, we should endeavor to model cheshbon hanefesh in a way that is not ostentatious. We can demonstrate to those around us that we ourselves are in a process of self-criticism and self-compassion. The truth is that sometimes people are embarrassed by one or the other. Some people are embarrassed to show their self-critique process because it exposes their vulnerabilities, while other people are embarrassed to show their self-compassion, fearing it may appear indulgent or reveal a lack of commitment to the growth process. But as we've seen, both self-criticism and self-generosity are integral parts of the growth process. Sometimes leadership requires modeling for others that paradoxically, we are both imperfect and perfect. We are pure and impure. We have divine souls, but also problematic thoughts and feelings and actions. By openly embracing ourselves in our fullness, we create a leadership culture that allows people to be both kind and accountable to themselves. An example that comes to mind is the question of retirement. When someone makes the decision to retire or even quit a job sometimes, there can be an element both of self-critique and self-compassion in the decision to say, I think I've offered all that I can offer here, is self-critique in that it acknowledges one's own limitations. The person choosing to step down sees that they can't offer as much as the position may require anymore. In some cases of retirement, of course, there's many different reasons. But as such, a decision is also self-compassion, in that there's a gentleness in the decision to remove ourselves from positions where we do not feel we can thrive in our fullness. We even see this in the Torah. When God instructs Moshe regarding his role in liberating Bnei Israel from Paro, Moses in liberating the Jewish people from Pharaoh, Moses acknowledges that he is slow of speech and slow of tongue. As a result, Moshe voicing this concern to God, Aaron, his brother, is appointed to speak on Moshe's behalf to the people. As God says, Aaron shall serve you as a spokesman. By being self-critical enough to voice his limitations, Moses opened the door for a leadership dynamic that would liberate us all. When we are honest with ourselves about our own capacities, we can be gentle with ourselves by not promising more than we can give. I myself certainly have experienced this to an extent when I am invited to come speak on an issue that I'm not familiar with. It's okay for me to say, I'm not the right person for the job. It's okay for me to acknowledge where I lack expertise. In fact, as we are seeing, it can be an act of deep self-compassion to not force myself to be more than I am. The process of self-critique and self-compassion goes well beyond the individual. It extends beyond the self and into the collective identity by which we connect to families and communities. As we are critical and compassionate toward ourselves, so too should we be critical and compassionate toward our communities. It is because we feel responsible toward our communities that we operate with both rigor and gentleness in responding to them. In fact, we can often do the most growth within our families and communities because we are so fully committed to both. Conversely, if we're not in compassionate relationship with a community, we can end up critiquing from a distance. This won't necessarily get us very far. Self-compassion and self-critique may seem like polar opposites, but I'm arguing today that they are in fact two sides of the same coin, both playing an integral role in our leadership, our interior moral journeys, and our commitments to ourselves and people around us. There's a perplexing, just to move towards a conclusion, a perplexing teaching in Pirkei Avot. Who is honored? One who honors others. Well, what does honoring others have anything to do with being honored oneself? One rabbi explains, if you give others kavod, making others feel special, then it must be that you have true kavod, honor. When you don't have real kavod, you don't have real self-respect or honor, then you're afraid to give it because you're worried that maybe the person you're giving it to has more than you. The more you can accord genuine honor to others, the more you can rest assured that the kavod you have is real. That's a teaching from the power of chinuch, the power of illuminating, raising great people. Indeed, friends, to conclude, by showing ourselves compassion and finding our true worth, we'll be most equipped to help others discover their own worth. Audre Lorde wrote, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. This is about our survival and a spiritual revolution for our society. Okay, friends, before I conclude and open the conversation, I want to just remind us that the month of Elul is coming up. And I want to invite us to, many of us are synagogue people. Many of us are not synagogue people. In fact, the high majority of American Jews are not synagogue people and don't go at all, right? But what would be a loss if we don't like rabbi sermons, or we don't like a choir singing, or we don't like cantorial voice, or we don't like holding a prayer book, or we don't like sitting in a large audience, or whatever it is that we might not like, that what we definitely can't throw out is the great Jewish gift of spending over a month in such a reflective process. Whatever path we choose for that, whether it is in our family room or in a synagogue many times or just once, a process that is both self-critical and self-compassionate, that just as we hit our hearts with our individual and collective misgivings and the times we've missed the mark, so too do we hold ourselves and realize that we also need to be held in such a process. So, okay, friends, I'm going to pause here. And I would like to invite your questions and thoughts, agreements and disagreements. Let's start with you, Lauren Blatt, up in the great country of Canada.
It sure is, but it's hot and humid, but nothing like what you guys have. I've been reading about the temperature in Phoenix. Stay hydrated, guys. So it's a question because there's a fine line between challenging yourself and self-compassion. I mean, I can use an example. I have long COVID, and it's very easy for me to say, you know what, I'll spend the whole day in bed. I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I can't do anything. Or I could challenge myself and do a few things. So how do you know where to get that fine line? That's my question.
Wow. That is a question I'm going to give back to the group. And what I would invite people to do is, rather than offer advice, reflect on how you do it for yourself. How do you, because all of us are different. And of course, we'll have to navigate that tension very differently, because some of us are incredibly privileged. Some of us are incredibly challenged at this stage of our life. Some of us have many privileges and many challenges. And we will navigate such a thing differently. So before anyone else shares something else, I'd like to open up Lauren's great and humble question of how do you navigate this tension for yourself?
I do. I certainly can empathize with Lauren's situation, although I'm sure I don't understand all the fine points of it. I can tell you this. I had a surgery in 2021 that went very wrong. I've said this about 4 million times, so you're probably sick of hearing that. But I was very sick. I was sick every day, and sick to the point of just crying. It was horrible. But what I found helped me was having, and of course this was during COVID, so obviously if you're sick, you're not going out. What helped me a lot was these online discussion groups or courses that I took. And what I found was, yeah, it was an effort to get out of bed and to go to where my computer was, but it was really inspiring, and it lightened the load of my feeling sorry for myself and for feeling bad, to engage with other people, even though I couldn't do that live, with other people, and to listen to other people talking about their situations and whatever. And that little effort that I made each day got me to the point where I was attending a bunch of different things, and I felt much better overall. Again, not advice. It's just I'm relaying what happened for me. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Toby. Yeah, thanks so much. Eileen, do you want to weigh in on this also? Okay, great. Eileen, over to you.
It seems to me that as a society, we are so busy with things that we never give ourselves the opportunity to reflect. And it's in that area of reflection and going within ourselves that I believe we find what we are able to do. And that's also how we resolve some of the problems that we face.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I think that there are a number of phenomena in our era that are preventing this process. I am guilty of being one of the people where sometimes there's a free moment, so I just find myself scrolling on the phone, scrolling on this or scrolling on that, and without scrolling, that might have been a reflective moment. And how can we replace, if anyone else struggles with that, some of the scrolling with some of the reflecting, and the younger generations all the more so. And the other is, in such a hyper-politicized time, we spend so much time in political critique, right? And even where political critique and the polemics are well placed, it takes up so much space that could be used for personal reflection as well. And in fact, so many of the vices that we just detest in politicians and in the other political party are the same vices that are within us to different degrees, and we have different levels of power. But it's another challenge. Yes. So, Judy, were you going to jump in? Great.
Yeah, in response to Lauren's point, I think that first of all, it's a work of a lifetime, and you can't expect there to be an answer that fits every day all the time. So you have to approach it with kindness. And for me, the best thing to do is to get outside of myself. So if I can find a way, like Toby said, to study something or to be with other people or to do for other people, it gives me the space for when I return to looking at myself to get a little distance. And in the meanwhile, I can feel super good about what I'm doing because either I'm learning or I'm doing for others.
Great. Very cool. Awesome. Yes. Hi, David. Thank you, Judy.
Hi. Yes. Yeah, I agree with everybody. Getting out of yourself, getting into nature, taking a walk with your dog. I love this time of year that when the gates open for a month, and it's a chance to be with other people and be reflective. I'm one of those temple shul guys. And I love our rabbi that says, yes, you can beat your breast when you're recounting your sins, but maybe massage your heart. So I try to do both.
Awesome, David. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's great. Thank you. Hi, Dr. Janie Heydrich. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not sharing my image this morning, but it's
all right. That's no problem.
Yeah, when you were talking about retirement or thinking that it's for ourselves, I remember going through retirement, some very selfish thoughts like, well, I'm the best person for this. I do this the best. Why would I retire now? So my thoughts had to get away from myself to how can I use this time in my life to develop someone else, transfer my knowledge, my skills to someone else, not all about me, but about making the world a better place. How can I do this? By raising someone else. And I think too many times we get carried away. I certainly do with how is this affecting me? Why am I doing this? How can I make myself feel better? Whereas if we get out of ourselves and think about the world or other people first, then the answer is simple. You just share and make it better.
Very nice. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Heydrich. I appreciate that. That's so much. Just the comment on the first thing you said, just me being a little nitpicky here, but you said, I'm not going to share my image. Well, you did share your image. We have come to believe, in fact, some of our biggest critiques in society is that we have to look perfect this way. We've come to think our image is our physical look. But our image, our Tselem Elokim, our image that gives us infinite dignity, actually emerges from a much deeper place. So when you just shared your ideas and your open heart with us, you very much shared your image.
Thank you. Well taken.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Who else wants to hop in here? Okay, while we're waiting for someone else to jump in, I'm just going to reflect on a movie that is coming out, which I have not seen yet, but about Christopher Reeves. And many of you are probably familiar with him. Everyone's probably familiar with him. But it's actually about how in his disability and in his paralysis, he was able to be transformative for medical research and for other people finding strength who were going through something similar. And again, I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say if it's a good film or not. And I never met him, so I can't say anything about him. But the story of actually how from our deepest vulnerability, that can be the place that we can lead from. that sometimes the deepest impact we can have in the world is not from our strength, but from our deepest vulnerability. And he's just one of so many examples of that. But we live in a society oftentimes that wants to hide the vulnerability and publicly demonstrate the strength and think that that's where we lead from. But I think that if we look at some of the greatest examples of heroism, I think it's exactly taking the shame out by taking something out of the closet, taking something out of the dark. That because when it's in the dark, we're ashamed of it, but when we bring it out into the light, we're less ashamed of it, and we can lead from it. Oh, Christopher Reeve, not Reeves. Yes, excuse me. Sorry. Yes. Hi, Sarah.
Shmuly. So, gosh, there's so many thoughts that are coming through my head. When I retired now more than 30 years ago, and I had been physically injured and could barely get along, but felt that it was my job because all of my partners continued to work through, their own problems and their own disabilities or whatever, that although I could barely stand and could barely move, I continued to work for a year. And finally, with a good therapist, said, why? And I retired. And I had interesting experiences. I had other docs coming up to me and taking me over to a corner and saying, well, I would do that, but don't tell my partners. So that the only people who really seemed to understand were the nurses, who were all very empathic. And it was the beginning for me of a really different pathway. The first real support I got along that way was from someone I was involved with who lived 1,000 miles away, who, when we would talk, said, well, what did you do today? And I said, I didn't do anything. I wrote, I reflected. He was like, wow, what a great day you had. What an amazing thing that you spent reflecting and thinking about where you are and what it means and where you're going next. And it never occurred to me that that mattered and that it wasn't in my doing as much as in my being that I made a difference. And every time I've faced another physical challenge, major physical challenge, I have taken that to heart. And over the last 30 plus years, I have made incredible discoveries, including self-compassion, that have brought me to this place, to being here with everyone else, being able to hear myself and hear others in a completely different way than I did when I was, a double-boarded physician. Big deal. That I knew that was not my identity. And it's taken me time to begin to discover who I really am and what I actually bring to the world. It wasn't all of that education. It was something entirely different. And I'm learning a lot of that, not only with you, but through Torah and through Musar and through so many avenues that I never would have explored otherwise. So I'm just expressing gratitude in this moment for that physical disability that allowed me to emerge. I'm complete.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So appreciative. I believe in my own theology very, very deeply. And I invite others to push back if you see this differently, that Judaism is anti-suffering. Judaism cares about quality of life. That's not to say that there's not a lot to learn from within suffering, but that we should not celebrate suffering and make it heroic and and take pride in it, and celebrate in others. That suffering in others is something we should combat, and suffering in ourselves is something we should combat. And that heroic sacrifice, heroic leadership, so to speak, the idea, it's such a toxic idea in my view, that heroic leadership requires immense suffering, right? That's what it means. And all the stories we tell of leadership and heroism being people who suffered enormously for others. Okay, that's one model. Sacrifice is real, right? But one of the things, celebrating life, Eileen, and I think that's both quantity of life and quality of life. And one of the things I keep telling myself in my work is don't celebrate working hard, celebrate working smart, right? Try to work smarter, not harder, right? Hard work is not the demonstration of our commitment, right? So anyways, thank you for that. And I appreciate what you said. And many of us do have to remove ourselves from certain settings where we are suffering. Do we have any Les Mis buffs here? Any Les Mis buffs? No? not a single Les Mis buff is here?
I am Aglaya. Sorry.
Oh, Aglaya. Okay. So
yeah,
Aglaya,
I can't say much today, so I'm really exhausted. Yeah.
So this will be just a conversation between me and you, and everyone else will just listen in because they don't like Les Mis. But I do wonder if Jean Valjean, when he basically steps down from being mayor, steps out of his leadership role because of the falsely accused person. That if there's a moment there of kind of his own self-critique of kind of owning who he is, that's also just a compassionate moment for himself and for this other person that he liberates. That sometimes being in hiding in another identity, and we do hide in other identities all the time, that liberating ourselves from the identity can liberate others as well as ourselves. So Aglaya, I don't know if you want to relate to that.
Yeah. Actually, that's even more detailed in the book, that why he actually turned himself in. The reason why was because of the fact that not only did he want to claim his own identity, though, but also he knew that he had to actually make amends for something that he had done. Like, while he was angry and all, just out of prison, he's just mad at the world and everything else like that. He actually had ended up stealing a coin from a little boy. He just to take his anger out and everything like that. And he tried to give it back to the little boy, but he couldn't find him. And so what ended up happening after that, though, when he's actually going through this whole idea, do I turn myself in? Do I stop being mayor? Blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like he starts to think, okay, no, I do deserve to go back to jail. And he does end up going back to jail because of the fact that he did this to this child while he was so angry also. So there's a lot that's actually going on there and everything. Now, I was going to shut up today, though, but apparently I can't keep my mouth shut. So anyway, but yeah, Les Mis buff, yes.
Aglaya, we never want you to keep your mouth shut. We always want to hear from you and everyone else here. Hi, Judy. Yes, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think one of the things you're talking about with stepping back is the notion of tzimtzum, where you withdraw, but it's to provide other people with opportunity. So that I think is essential to leadership, and it can be an act of self-mercy in the way that Sarah was talking about.
I'm glad you said that, because that's actually the title of our next session is Stepping Back. The title of our next session is Stepping Back, which is all these are connected, but certainly separate. So thank you for giving us that intro for next session. Awesome. Great. Who else wants to jump in? Let's start with some folks we haven't heard from yet. If Joseph or Shulamit or Jeff, Carrie or Alex or Aglaya, you have shared. So anybody else want to jump in? Maybe somebody wants to reflect also on the point of how being more self-compassionate enabled you to be more compassionate to someone else, or the opposite, how being more self-critical, holding yourself accountable more, enabled you to be more compassionate to someone else. Yeah, Toby, hi.
I just want to comment on something that Sarah said. I think if you are in any profession actually, but I experienced very similar things coming up through the ranks of being a lawyer. It is that unspoken hierarchy, and we are not. Not all your mentors treat you well. You sometimes learn from mistakes, but the problem is that while we're working through that, and while we're in many cases younger, we don't get that not all learning is good learning. That the abuse that people, hey, you got to earn your bones here. Nobody's going to give you a free ride. You got to, be the last in line at calendar call. Everybody has their things, and it is part of the culture at least in the United States, and at least in the law profession, probably in others, that you have to pay your dues, and that's a part of advancing in the profession. And it's like being bullied in grade school, but I couldn't find personally a way to circumvent that. And of course, when you're going through all that, you don't have a lot of time to reflect on, is this appropriate behavior on the part of these other people? And is my response appropriate? So giving her some slack on having to go through all that torture that she went through. And in her case, it was a physical thing, but sometimes the teaching of others can be very, very stressful, and you don't really know, because you haven't had the experience of how to get out of that. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. And sadly, there's a similar trend in Jewish education, where people actually found it really boring as a kid. I'm sure none of you found your Jewish educational experiences very boring, but there's a phenomenon where people found it boring. Actually, they want it to be boring for their kids, because I can't even relate to this, but it's a phenomenon that's out there. I want it to be boring for them, so they go through what I went through. It's like I've said it before, but like, you want to see the suffering of the Jewish people, look at a bar bat mitzvah student learning the Torah portion, and in their face you'll see all of the suffering of the history of the Jewish people, right? But in fact, there are people who are like, I hated reading Torah, and I never did anything with it after, but I'm going to make my kid do it, so they went through what I went through, right? What? Like, where's the joy in that? If it's meaningful, have them do it, but to have them, but yeah, so I think it's in many professions as well, as you're saying, Toby, this idea that you have to kind of go through some suffering experience to kind of prove yourself. And that notion of rite of passage also, in terms of becoming a bar bat mitzvah, that it needs to be a painful experience. I think people mistakenly think of it that way, as opposed to a meaningfully enriched, and yes, a demanding learning experience. But okay, we didn't hear from Steve yet, or Gary, and I see Gary's hand up, so perfect timing. Yeah, hi, Gary.
Good morning, everyone. Two thoughts here. One was just to mention what Toby is in the medical profession. That surely parallels the law profession. But having taught for a bunch of years, and originally started teaching like I was taught, and then started taking adult education classes, the reality is we teach like we were taught, but it's not necessarily the right way. And if you try to change that, it can be effective. And I think that in society, we can use that same analogy to help others, that if you don't like what something is done to you, then why do it to other people? And in our professions, that's easy to say, oh, yeah, that's the way I was done, and you can yell and scream, but it doesn't get anything really done, doesn't change the culture. And so on a day-to-day basis, ourselves can be role models to help try to change the culture of the people we come in contact with. But the other part that I really wanted to discuss was about reflection. I think that, and somebody mentioned it, that, we could work 24/7 the way we are. Our culture and society has changed where we can't find time to reflect. We work, sorry, Shmuly, you sit on your phone all day, or, the same thing, we're constantly looking at our phone, or we're watching TV, or we're doing something with the kids, but we don't find any personal time to reflect. And I'll be the first to say that it's very difficult before I retired to find that reflection time, and haven't always been involved in shuls in Phoenix, where they, especially Bethel, where I live nearby, I would go to shul in the morning. I loved morning minyan. It was always a small group. It was quiet. You get to know everybody. And even though the davening didn't always speak to me, but it was a time to be able to a jump off space, and I really enjoyed that. And culture has changed where there's not a synagogue in a conservative synagogue in the greater Phoenix area that doesn't have a morning minyan anymore because there's nobody thinks it's important. So I mean so I have to find time to reflect personally. It's easier to do, like I said, when I'm retired now, but I still miss that time to do some inner reflections, and that's just part of where society is moving, where people in general don't maybe feel it's important to find time to reflect.
Great, Gary. Yeah, thank you so much. That's such an important point. And it can be so hard for us to do and to find the right questions for my reflection today, which might be different questions than my reflection yesterday. Thank you so much for that. And, going back to this idea that we've been kind of in and out of today around when to be hard with myself, when to be gentle with myself, when is it one and the same? And just thinking of my beloved mother, watching my beloved mother dying and watching her transition from fighting disease to surrendering. That moment of fighting to surrender was so interesting to watch because my mother was always a fighter. She was always very proactive, very engaged, never passive. And that was just kind of who she was. And then there was this shift, a very quick shift. But the thought I've been thinking about is that it doesn't have to be a moment in our life that happens, that rather every moment is a death and every moment gives a rebirth to a new moment of life. And in every moment, as the death of that last moment passes and a new moment of life is born, we have a choice to let go and reclaim. And there's constantly a letting go and a re-owning. And how can we do that for ourselves as well? In that reflective process Gary's talking about, give ourselves that gift of both being gentle with ourselves and stepping up to the opportunity of that new moment. There's a fight and a surrender that's almost can be built into each moment of rebirth.
I'll jump in.
Great.
It's all about holding on and letting go. And just in breathing, the physiology of breathing is when you breathe in, yes, you're energized. It's the sympathetic nervous system. It's, energy. Letting go, when you breathe out, it's the parasympathetic. And so in meditation, Tai Chi, you can work with that and learn how to do both, breathing in, breathing out. And that goes through all of Judaism, the breath of life, that metaphor.
Right. Beautiful. And you build off your idea there, one of the thoughts I've often had, because I think about the balance of taking and giving in the world, is sometimes I'll meditate on a breath in being kind of taking from the world. I'm taking life as I breathe in. And then when I breathe out, I'm kind of giving life towards the world. And that this giving and taking is interconnected. And that we need not be ashamed with taking, but feel good about nourishing ourselves and breathing in. And also feel like we're breathing out compassion to the world. Yes, thanks, Toby. Yeah, for that process theology. Yeah, lots to say about that. Yeah, good point, David. So friends, today, just to kind of recap here, we talked about leadership and getting clarity on what we're about, what's our purpose in the world, and getting clarity that in that process, of discovering our purpose each day, that we continue to see, as we talked about last session, lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, that we can't do it all, but we have to do our part. That in that very teaching, there is the challenge of self, that I have to do my part. None of us is free to not do our part. And yet the gentle factor of saying, I can only do my part. Are people who have done so much more than their part. I was thinking yesterday about Janusz Korczak. I don't know. I don't speak any Polish, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. But many of you know the story of Janusz. Anyways, he was the one who, in the Shoah, was a pediatrician and was running an orphanage. and had many opportunities to escape and to be freed because of how prestigious and respected he was in Polish society. But he would not leave these roughly 192 orphans. And even when they were putting these orphans onto the train to go to Treblinka, and he had another chance to leave and escape and save his life, he said, "I won't leave the orphans." And he went all the way to the gas chambers in Treblinka with these children, all the way. And there are stories like that in our people and in our tradition of just enormous self-sacrifice. And hopefully few of us are called upon to do acts like that. And there are also stories that are so subtle and so quiet and so not life-giving and sacrificing, about how we can each day figure out this balance once again, to keep growing and find joy in the growth. It's not self-critique of just beating myself up. It's a joyful moral growth of maybe self-critique is even the wrong phrase for it, of what this looks like to take a cheshbon hanefesh, that in all of our capacities, mental, emotional, intellectual, monetary, our time, that we have so much to give. We all have so much to give, and there's a joy in that. And to really see our own limits not as vices, but our limits are also divine in a sense, of what we can do and what we can't do. So, friends, I hope we will hold public leaders accountable, as we should. And I hope we'll hold all of us accountable in our leadership as we seek to offer what we can in this world. Have a beautiful day. Great to be with you. Thank you so much for your insights and
Thank
stories.
you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody.